the very heart of human thought beats a question that, despite centuries of philosophy and decades of modern science, remains untouched. Why does conscious experience exist? We are not speaking of how we detect stimuli, nor how the brain processes information. It is deeper, more elusive. David Chalmers called it the hard problem of consciousness, distinguishing it from the so-called easy problems, those that explain observable functions and behaviors. The real mystery is why a collection of physical processes, however complex, is accompanied by the subjective feeling of being. Consider something as simple as vision. Neuroscience can describe in detail how light strikes the retina, how it is converted into electrical signals, and how these signals travel through neural pathways to specialized areas of the brain. It can even simulate this process in machines. Yet no equation explains why that electrical pattern feels like the vivid red of a rose or the deep blue of the ocean. Between neural activity and subjective experience, there is a gap that for now seems impossible to bridge. Faggin, with his gaze that unites science and wisdom, reminds us that consciousness cannot be reduced to mere mechanisms. Here, classical physics reaches a limit. It can describe matter and energy, but not the intimate glow of experience. Max Planck, one of the fathers of quantum physics, expressed it with visionary clarity. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. This perspective raises a provocative question. If matter is secondary, then perhaps the so-called laws of physics are not ultimate truths, but expressions of how consciousness shapes form. Gravity, electromagnetism, and even quantum uncertainty could be seen less as fixed mechanisms and more as languages through which consciousness speaks. Such a reversal challenges both science and our everyday assumptions about reality. To grasp the magnitude of the hard problem, imagine a machine that perfectly reproduces every synapse and every electrical discharge of a human brain. Would it have consciousness? Would it feel pain, love, or beauty? Or would it be, as some philosophers fear, a philosophical zombie, outwardly indistinguishable from a person, yet devoid of all inner experience? This thought experiment does not solve the enigma, but exposes it with striking clarity. The hard problem is a reminder that science has not reached the end of its journey. Even with the boldest advances in neuroscience and artificial intelligence, we have not crossed the threshold that separates objective description from subjective experience. And perhaps, as Faggin suggests, that threshold cannot be crossed with our current tools, because what we are trying to understand is the very foundation of reality itself. Faggin urges us to face this mystery with curiosity. Every great scientific revolution, heliocentrism, relativity, quantum mechanics, arose when old frameworks failed. Consciousness may be the next frontier, demanding the courage to question our deepest certainties. While physics and biology remain vital, perhaps the most essential tool is the willingness to experience reality directly. At this point, the mystery ceases to be a mere intellectual challenge and becomes an invitation to look inward with the same intensity with which we look outward at the universe. Perhaps, to understand consciousness, we must stop seeing it as a byproduct of matter and begin to regard it as the root from which everything else grows. And so, the hard problem becomes an open doorway, not only for science, but for our own understanding of what it truly means to exist. If the hard problem of consciousness is an open question, the tentative answers have given rise to theories as fascinating as they are controversial. Among them, two stand out for their power to provoke reflection: epiphenomenalism and panpsychism. Epiphenomenalism argues that consciousness is a byproduct of the brain's physical activity, like the smoke of a bonfire, visible and real, but without influence over the flames that generate it. According to this view, what we think or feel does not alter in the slightest the physical processes that make us who we are. For Thomas Henry Huxley, one of its early defenders, we are like silent passengers on a train. We travel and observe, but we never touch the controls. In his words, the mind is to the body what the whistle is to the locomotive, something that accompanies but never directs. This vision, while logically coherent, leaves a bitter taste. Are we then mere spectators of our own lives, condemned to watch without ever shaping the outcome? Faggin points out that this stance, by stripping consciousness of any causal power, reduces its intrinsic value to almost nothing, and collides with the deep human intuition that our decisions and feelings matter. This is not just an abstract concern. It strikes at the heart of human dignity. If our minds are mere shadows, then our hopes, loves, and struggles lose the weight we instinctively feel they carry. It is a view that provokes unease because it suggests that the very sense of authorship over our lives is an illusion. On the opposite end, we find panpsychism, an idea as old as pre-Socratic philosophy and revitalized in today's scientific debates. Panpsychism claims that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, present in everything that exists, from subatomic particles to the most complex organisms. It does not imply that a rock thinks or that an electron feels love, but that at the deepest level of reality, there is a seed of experience. Erwin Schrödinger, one of the architects of quantum mechanics, reflected on the underlying unity of mind and matter. For him, the multiplicity of apparent consciousnesses could in fact be different windows onto a single universal awareness. This vision resonates with mystical intuitions and with theories seeking to reconcile physics with subjective experience. Panpsychism, though often dismissed as speculative, forces us to reimagine reality itself. If even the smallest particle holds a trace of awareness, then the cosmos becomes not a dead machine, but a living field of experience. This perspective invites awe and perhaps even a renewed sense of responsibility for how we relate to the world around us. Between these two poles, the mind as powerless epiphenomenon and the mind as the fabric of the cosmos, unfolds a vast field of debate. Faggin suggests that perhaps the key lies in reformulating the questions. Rather than asking whether consciousness influences matter, we might investigate how both interact at a deeper level, perhaps still unknown to modern science. Here, the boundary between physics and philosophy becomes blurred. Panpsychism suggests that consciousness could be as elemental as mass or electric charge, something irreducible to simpler terms. Epiphenomenalism, on the other hand, reminds us of the temptation to believe that anything mysterious is, in the end, dispensable. Between the two lies the frontier of our knowledge, a terrain where experiments have yet to reach, and where speculation, guided by rigor and humility, remains indispensable. Perhaps, as Faggin hints, this frontier is not a wall, but a horizon. And like any horizon, it recedes as we advance, compelling us to keep exploring. There is a realm into which no one but ourselves can ever enter, the realm of our own conscious experience. No matter how advanced science or technology becomes, neither can cross the invisible threshold that separates what we feel inside from what others can observe. This absolute intimacy is what Faggin calls the privacy of consciousness, and it remains one of the deepest mysteries of being. We can describe what we see, hear our words recorded, measure the electrical activity of our brain. But none of that is the experience itself. The scent of a flower, the emotional weight of a memory, or the vibration of a musical note cannot be transmitted intact to another person. What reaches the other is a story, a gesture, a sign, never the pure experience. This impossibility of sharing qualia, the basic elements of experience, has inspired thought experiments such as the philosophical zombie, a being that behaves exactly like a human but lacks any inner life. On the surface, nothing would reveal the difference. Inside, there is only absolute emptiness. The philosopher and writer Umberto Galimberti observed that language, no matter how sophisticated, always collides with the limits of the ineffable. There are shades of experience that cannot be reduced to words without losing their essence. Trying to describe them is like trying to capture a fragrance in a drawing. Something always escapes. Poetry, however, sometimes brushes against that hidden world. Edgar Lee Masters, in his Spoon River anthology, gave voice to fictional characters who, from the grave, confessed feelings and truths they never shared while alive. His verses remind us that inner experience is a universe that reveals itself only in fragments, and much of it dies with us. Faggin notes that this radical privacy is not only a limitation, but also a source of richness. If we could gain direct access to the minds of others, we would lose the uniqueness that defines individuality. The fact that each consciousness is a closed cosmos creates the diversity of perspectives that nourishes art, science, and human coexistence. But this same privacy poses a challenge for science. How can we study something that cannot be directly observed? Neural correlates of consciousness can show patterns of activity linked to certain mental states, but they can never capture what it feels like to live them. It is a methodological obstacle that keeps the hard problem at the center of debate. Perhaps, as Faggin suggests, this is an invitation to acknowledge the limits of objective knowledge and to open ourselves to more integrative forms of exploration, ones that regard subjective experience as data just as real and fundamental as any physical measurement. Because the secret world of experience is not a mere accessory to life. It is, for each of us, life itself. This is why Faggin insists that the mystery of consciousness is not merely a puzzle for philosophers, but a challenge for each of us in everyday life. Consider how often we assume that others understand us, when in truth, they can only guess at the private world we inhabit. This gap is both a source of frustration and a doorway to empathy. It reminds us that genuine dialogue requires patience, imagination, and the humility to know that the other person's inner world will never be entirely ours to possess. At the very heart of conscious experience lies a private territory, and its landscapes are formed by the qualia, those irreducible building blocks of subjectivity that define how we sense, think, and perceive. Faggin proposes that even though qualia cannot be measured or observed from the outside, we can chart them from within, creating a taxonomy of their shapes and tones. Such classification is not meant to diminish their mystery, but rather to provide a kind of inner map with which we may orient ourselves amidst the richness of lived experience. In this inner cartography, the first major group is made up of sensations. These are the qualia tied directly to our senses: the red glow of a sunset, the rough surface of a stone, the freshness of a summer breeze upon the skin. Each is unique and unrepeatable. Even if two people gaze at the very same horizon, the inner experience of color, shape, or sound will never be identical. This is where the mystery resides. Sensations are private worlds impossible to transfer in their fullness to another human being. The second group is formed by emotions. These cannot be reduced merely to physiological shifts or chemical reactions. They are complete universes of experience that color our perception of the world. Joy, sadness, fear, or gratitude are not just labels. They are living, breathing landscapes of feeling that can completely transform the meaning of a moment. William James, a pioneer in the psychology of emotion, once remarked, "We do not cry because we are sad because we cry." His words remind us of the profound entanglement between body and mind in emotional life. The third group is made up of thoughts, understood here not as abstract logic alone, but as qualia with conceptual content. The sudden flash of an intuition, the clarity of a deduction, or the dizziness brought by a paradox all belong to this category. These intellectual qualia demonstrate that the mind too has its felt texture, that ideas can vibrate with an intensity equal to that of a melody or a scent. Finally, Faggin distinguishes what he calls spiritual or transcendent feelings, those that seem to connect individual consciousness to something far greater. These include experiences of universal love, profound compassion, or mystical states that move beyond the ordinary logic of daily life. They appear in moments when we feel ourselves part of an immense whole, gazing at a star-strewn sky in silence, or listening to a piece of music that brings us to tears for no reason we can name. To illustrate this dimension, Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Love your solitude and endure the pain it causes you." For him, love was not a fleeting mood, but a force that shapes consciousness, urging us to look beyond the narrow borders of the self. In a similar way, the teachings of the Buddha describe awakening as a path of dissolving the illusion of separation and cultivating compassion as a living practice. Faggin emphasizes that in classifying the qualia, we are not imprisoning them in rigid categories, but acknowledging both their diversity and their interwoven nature. Consciousness is not a series of neatly divided compartments, but a flowing tapestry where sensation, emotion, intellect, and transcendence constantly overlap. Science, however, finds itself facing a dilemma. Because qualia cannot be accessed directly from the outside, the scientific method tends either to ignore them or to reduce them to observable physical processes. But as Faggin reminds us, what cannot be measured does not therefore cease to exist. On the contrary, it often proves to be the most essential. The Map of Qualia, then, is not merely a philosophical curiosity. It is an invitation to explore who we truly are. A mosaic where every piece, sensory, emotional, intellectual, or spiritual, contributes to a living whole, dynamic and ever-changing. And perhaps, in acknowledging this inner richness, we find a subtle yet powerful truth. Consciousness cannot be confined to the sterile language of equations alone. It must be lived, spoken, sung, and even wept, if we are to do justice to the astonishing mystery of what it means to be alive. Each moment of our lives is impregnated with meanings. We do not simply see shapes and colors. We interpret, associate, and evaluate. Faggin points out that this capacity to give meaning is not a mere intellectual process, but a fabric where memory, emotions, and sensory perceptions intersect. Think of a smell. The odor of burnt rubber, for instance, is not just a chemical signal detected by the nose. It may bring to mind memories of a car race, the worry of an accident, or, for someone else, the exhilarating freedom of a road trip. The meaning does not reside in the stimulus itself, but in the web of associations that surrounds it. To make this even clearer, think of how music works. A simple melody may sound pleasant, but when connected with a personal memory, it becomes overwhelming. The same tune can make one person cry, another laugh, and another simply hum along absent-mindedly. This phenomenon is not limited to the senses. A word, a gesture, or a sound can acquire value through the experiences we associate with it. Here, Faggin introduces the idea of hierarchies of meaning. Some experiences carry such a strong emotional and symbolic weight that they reshape the interpretation of others. A painful event, for example, may cast a shadow of negativity over places or people that once evoked joy. This suggests that meaning is not stored in objects or events themselves, but is continuously recreated by the mind. Reality is not merely received, it is interpreted, filtered, and reshaped. In this sense, each human being is both an interpreter and a creator of worlds. In this intricate fabric, the ego plays an ambiguous role. On the one hand, it gives us a sense of identity that organizes our experiences. On the other, it can magnify suffering by clinging to past wounds or future fears. The ego does not merely interpret the present, it filters it through a personal narrative that seeks coherence, even if that means distorting reality. Here, literature offers mirrors of these dynamics. Fyodor Dostoevsky once wrote, "Man is unhappy because he does not know he is happy." This paradox reveals how the meaning we give to life depends as much on our perspective as on objective circumstances. The same fact may be a source of gratitude or bitterness, depending on the interpretive frame we adopt. Faggin stresses that understanding this process is key to transforming our relationship with the world. If we accept that meanings are not immutable, we can reinterpret past experiences and open ourselves to new ways of perceiving the present. This does not mean denying pain, but recognizing that even pain can acquire a constructive sense when integrated into a broader vision of existence. In practice, this means that every encounter, every sensation, and every thought are potential turning points. A gesture of kindness may tear down internal walls built over years. A brief conversation may spark a change that alters the course of a life. Meaning is ultimately a creative force. It not only colors reality, but can transform it. Thus, the process of giving meaning to the world is not a passive act of reception, but a constant construction, a dialogue between what comes from outside and what already lives within us. And in that dialogue, as Faggin insists, lies the key to a fuller and more conscious existence. If there are qualia capable of radically transforming our perception of the world, those are love and compassion. Faggin argues that these are not merely intense emotions, but states of consciousness that reshape the way we relate to ourselves, to others, and to reality as a whole. The love Faggin describes is not confined to romantic affection or family bonds. It is an expansive force that breaks through the barriers of the ego. When we experience it, we cease to see others as separate objects and begin to recognize them as part of the same web of existence. This expansion of consciousness can manifest in simple moments, a shared smile, a selfless act. Yet its impact is profound and enduring. Compassion, meanwhile, is the active recognition of another's suffering and the genuine desire to alleviate it. It is not pity nor mere empathy. It is an inner movement that compels us to act. In Buddhist teachings, compassion is inseparable from wisdom, because once the interdependence of all beings is understood, the impulse to care arises naturally. Faggin illustrates this with a simple but powerful example. Imagining a rose in full bloom. It is not enough to describe its color, texture, or fragrance. The moment of contemplating it in silence awakens a state of connection that transcends the physical. The rose is not just an object. It becomes a bridge to an experience of beauty and unity that embodies love itself. That instant, unrepeatable and untransferable, becomes a qualia that leaves an indelible mark on consciousness. These states are not fleeting sparks reserved for exceptional moments. We can cultivate them deliberately, training our attention to perceive our shared humanity beyond superficial differences. This cultivation reshapes the inner structure of consciousness, enabling experiences of connection and fulfillment that transcend immediate circumstances. Mahatma Gandhi expressed this clearly. Compassion is a force more powerful than electricity. In his vision, love and compassion were not abstract ideals, but real energies capable of moving entire communities towards change. Similarly, Leo Tolstoy believed that the only force capable of transforming the world is selfless love. Throughout history, philosophers and spiritual teachers have insisted that love and compassion are not secondary traits, but essential dimensions of what it means to be human. From the Christian idea of caritas to the Buddhist concept of metta, cultures across the globe have pointed to the same truth, that without compassion, our lives remain fragmented. Modern societies often underestimate this, but even in moments of crisis, it is compassion that unites people, reminding us that survival itself is collective. However, cultivating these qualities is not without its challenges. We live in a world that often rewards competition and self-sufficiency over cooperation and mutual care. In this context, love and compassion may appear as vulnerabilities. Faggin turns this perception upside down. He maintains that they are, in fact, signs of an evolved consciousness and of a strength that does not need to dominate in order to be effective. At a scientific level, some researchers have explored the physiological and neurological effects of compassion and altruistic love. Practices such as compassion meditation show measurable changes in brain areas linked to emotional regulation and empathy. Studies in positive psychology also suggest that people who cultivate compassion enjoy greater resilience and overall well-being. Recent scientific research has also started to confirm what ancient wisdom had already suggested. Neuroscientists observing long-term meditators have found increased activity in brain regions related to empathy and emotional balance. Psychologists studying communities that practice altruism consistently report higher levels of happiness and resilience. Even in healthcare, programs that encourage compassionate interaction between doctors and patients show measurable improvements in recovery and quality of life. These findings suggest that compassion is not only morally desirable, but biologically advantageous. Ultimately, love and compassion are more than emotions. They are keys to unlocking a deeper level of consciousness. As Faggin affirms, by cultivating them, we align ourselves with a broader reality and come closer to realizing that true strength lies not in control, but in connection. For Faggin, consciousness is not an accidental byproduct of matter, nor a late spark in the evolution of the universe. It is, on the contrary, the foundation upon which everything else rests. Matter, space, time, and physical laws emerge within consciousness, not the other way around. This perspective challenges us to question what we often take for granted, that the universe is simply out there, waiting to be measured. Instead, it suggests that reality is inseparable from the conscious act of experiencing it, reminding us that every observation is already filtered through awareness. This vision subverts the dominant materialist paradigm, which assumes that everything real must be measurable and reducible to physical interactions. Faggin proposes a radical inversion. What we perceive as the objective world is a construction of consciousness, a set of experiences organized by our perceptual and cognitive capacities. In this context, quantum physics ceases to be merely a mathematical language and becomes a doorway to new interpretations of reality. Phenomena such as superposition, entanglement, or the collapse of the wave function suggest that observation is not passive. It is an act that participates in the very configuration of what we call real. John Wheeler expressed it clearly. The universe is not something that exists out there independently. We participate in its creation. Max Planck, father of quantum theory, had already affirmed that consciousness is fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. Faggin takes up this idea to emphasize that if consciousness is at the base of everything, then understanding it is as crucial as understanding the laws of physics. If we accept this premise, love, compassion, creativity, and intuition cease to be secondary phenomena and become essential expressions of a living, conscious universe. Instead of seeing them as biological anomalies, we recognize them as part of the very fabric of reality. Faggin employs a powerful analogy. In a dream, everything we experience, people, landscapes, dialogues, exists solely within the dreamer's consciousness. Yet, while it lasts, we live it as real. Something similar could happen in waking life. What we call the external world may be a stage generated in and by consciousness, with consistent rules, but not absolute. This analogy resonates with modern debates in philosophy of mind and quantum theory, where researchers increasingly argue that what we call the external world may be a participatory process. The dream metaphor is powerful because it shows that reality does not need to be independent of consciousness to feel undeniably real. This perspective also transforms our notion of identity. If consciousness is universal, each individual self is like a wave in a vast ocean. It maintains its form for a time, but its essence is inseparable from the water that composes it. Erwin Schrödinger put it bluntly: consciousness is singular, not plural. What seems plural is only the illusion of separation. Far from opposing science, this vision broadens it. Objective investigation remains valuable, but it must integrate subjective experience as a legitimate element. This would imply a paradigm shift in which the study of the cosmos and the study of the mind converge in the same enterprise, to understand consciousness in all its dimensions. The practical implications are profound. If we all share the same conscious essence, divisions based on race, nationality, or ideology lose their solidity. The harm inflicted on others is felt as harm to ourselves. The good we do resonates beyond our personal boundaries. Mahatma Gandhi already intuited this interconnection when he said, "In true unity, the well-being of each is the well-being of all." In practical terms, embracing this worldview means cultivating empathy and responsibility at both personal and collective levels. Education, politics, and even technology could be reshaped if we began from the principle that consciousness is not a byproduct, but the foundation of existence. Imagine, for instance, scientific projects designed not just to conquer or exploit nature, but to collaborate with it as a conscious partner. Ultimately, Faggin poses an invitation to live as if consciousness were the ultimate substrate of reality. This is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a transformative practice that could lead us to understand, and perhaps to experience, a universe where separation is only an appearance. concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.